Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And we got an exciting big class once again. So let us get started with our topic. Here we go. Secrets of the Bible. And of course, we always want to thank our sponsor, to the August family, Susan and Gary August, for helping us make this course possible. And this week, the topic is Joseph and his brothers. I got a question for all of you. Who was the first in the Bible to play tennis? Any of you know? It was Joseph. He served in Pharaoh's court. All right, okay. All right, you got it? Okay. All right, let us get started. It's a rocky story. You know, this is it's a fascinating story. It's a real drama, this story. The story of Joseph and his brothers is probably also one of the more famous biblical stories. Right, if I'm not mistaken, it was made into a Broadway show, correct? The story of Joseph?
Yeah.
It's a very dramatic story. A lot of emotional drama. It's also a very disturbing story, as we're going to tackle it head on today. And I think this class has the best to offer for what we're trying to accomplish in this course. Really getting down to the bottom of a story, really seeing how the simple meaning of the story is way too elementary. And the only way to understand it is by going very deep and showing how powerful and personal the story is once you truly understand what the essence, what the secret of the story is. So this lesson, I think, really does that in a very fascinating way. So it's an exciting class. I'm excited you're all here. Hello, everybody who's just joining us now. Beth, hey Beth, how are you? Hello, Ellen, how are you? And okay, here we go. We're going to begin, as we always do, with the simple story at face value. The way it is in the Torah, we're going to read the texts. We'll do it through a video. And it begins on page 102 if you would like to follow along in your books, or you can just follow along the video. But the verses that we're going to be reading are right here. And here begins the drama of Joseph and his brothers. Here we go.
Joseph was 17 years old, shepherding with his brothers in the flocks. And Joseph brought bad word of them to their father. Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, as he was a child of old age to him, and he made him a striped coat. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and they hated him. And they were not able to speak peaceably with him. Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brothers, "Here we were bundling sheaves in the middle of the field, and here my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And here your sheaves surrounded, and they bowed to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Shall you then reign over us, or will you rule over us?" And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. He again dreamed another dream and related it to his brothers, and he said, "Here I have dreamed another dream, and behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing to me." His brothers envied him, but his father guarded the matter.
Things come to a head when, one day, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers, who are out shepherding the flocks in the countryside.
They saw him from afar, and when he had yet to come near to them, they schemed against him to put him to death. And they said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Now let us go and kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'An evil beast has devoured him,' and we shall see what will become of his dreams."
Reuben, the eldest of the brothers, dissuades the others from committing outright murder, suggesting that, instead, they throw him into one of the pits out there in the wilderness.
When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his coat, the striped coat that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. They sat down to eat bread, and they lifted their eyes, and they saw, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead. And Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but our hand shall not be upon him, as he is our brother, our flesh." His brothers listened, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. They took Joseph's coat, and they slaughtered a hairy goat, and they dipped the coat in the blood. They sent the striped coat to their father, and they said, "We found this. Please recognize. Is it your son's coat or not?" He recognized it and said, "My son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Torn. Joseph is torn." And he mourned his son many days.
All right, that's our story so far. Definitely a disturbing story of this little brother getting bullied by a whole pack of his older brothers. And that's it. Becomes a long lost brother. The father thinks he's dead. And the story continues, though. The drama continues. And the story continues 22 years later. That's when we pick up the story again. 22 years later, through a dramatic turn of events, Joseph meets his brothers again. So let us now continue with the next part of the story, and then we'll start discussing and jumping in. So this is part one. We're going now another 22 years later. Here it goes.
The next segment we will read is from Genesis, chapter 45, and it occurs 22 years after the selling of Joseph. In the interim, this is what happened. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court. Joseph was immensely successful in everything that he did, and he was put in charge of all his master's affairs. Potiphar's wife lusted after the beautiful and charismatic young slave, and she tried to seduce him. When Joseph rejected her advances, Potiphar's wife had him thrown into prison. After many years in prison, Joseph gained his freedom when he successfully interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, which predicted 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh appointed Joseph viceroy of Egypt, and Joseph's successful planning saved the entire region from starvation. The famine also engulfed the land of Israel, and Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to purchase grain. Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. Joseph accused his brothers of being spies. Taking one of the brothers as a hostage, he forced them to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt. At first, Jacob refused to send Benjamin to Egypt, but the famine was in full force, and soon their food ran out. Finally, Judah persuaded Jacob by vowing to assume personal responsibility for Benjamin's safety. When the brothers came to Egypt for the second time, Joseph framed Benjamin by planting his silver goblet in Benjamin's sack. He arrested the brothers and declared that Benjamin will remain in Egypt as his slave. Judah approaches Joseph to plead for Benjamin's release, offering himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. This is what happens next.
Joseph was no longer able to constrain himself, and he called, "Remove every man from my presence." And no man stood with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He put his voice to weeping, and Egypt heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers could not answer him, as they were bewildered before him. And Joseph said to his brothers, And now do not be distressed, and it should not upset you that you sold me here. For as a source of livelihood, God has sent me before you. It is not you who sent me here, but God. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'So said your son Joseph, God has placed me master to all of Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay.'"
And that is how Jacob and his 12 sons, who would become the 12 tribes of Israel, ended up in Egypt.
All right. So it's a fascinating story, definitely an emotionally tugging story. And that's a story. They lived happily ever after. Finally, after so many years of being apart, the brothers re-accept Joseph back into the family. They live together. That's how we ended up in Egypt. The whole story of the exodus of Egypt. It's all because they sent Joseph down to Egypt and the family came to Egypt. It all starts over there. But the whole story in general is troubling. You don't need to look at the details to, for the story to be a little bit of a weird story. Number one, we see this tremendous tension in the family. The brothers hate Joseph. Joseph is his little brother. He's definitely the father, Jacob. We even see the tension within Jacob. Jacob takes an extra liking to Joseph specifically more than to the other brothers. So there's something unique about Joseph. There's some type of tension. And it's not just between the brothers, but even the father has that tension. Even the father takes a preference towards Joseph. And we need to understand what's the nature of the struggle? What's the nature of this rift? Why is there so much tension in the family? What's behind all the family politics? So on first glance, what would you say? Say, look, it's not a big deal. Brothers are allowed to be jealous. And this is maybe just a story of family jealousy. The father, for some reason or another, is enamored with this one son, Joseph, giving him extra attention, maybe perhaps too much overt attention. And the brothers are jealous. But if you look at the story, it's more extreme than that. We see a tremendous tension. Is it just jealousy? They even want to kill him. Can you imagine that? It's not just a story of like, okay, we're just jealous, so, we're going to bully you. They're going to very extreme lengths to get rid of Joseph. And we see something very extreme over here. Also what some people would say to the story, which I think is the way that we would commonly look at the story from our own, very human lenses, would be like, look, we've had in the Bible before brothers killing brothers. The first brothers in the Torah, Cain and Abel. The first murder in history was a brother murdering a brother. We've had last week Jacob and Esau. Esau wanted to kill Joseph. Esau wanted to kill Jacob. So we've had before in the Bible brothers getting neck on neck. The only problem over here is that we're not just talking about the evil brother. We're talking about the 12 tribes of Israel, the very founding fathers of the Jewish people. Till today, you're named after your tribe. We look at these 12 brothers, the 12 sons of Jacob, as tzaddikim, as holy men, the very founders and fathers of the Jewish people. There has to be something deeper than just jealousy leading to a bloodthirsty desire for murder. It has to be something deeper if you want to really get down to the bottom of the story. So that's really question number one. We want to understand, why did the brothers have so much animosity? Why was there so much tension? What's behind this tension? We need to understand the nature behind the struggle. That's question number one. Question number two is on the second part of the story, on how Joseph treats his brothers when they actually come down to Egypt. So the video really summarized the whole sequence of events. But just think about what Joseph does. The brothers come down desperate. They're hungry. Joseph's own father is hungry. They're starving. It's a famine. They come down in desperation to Egypt. They don't know that he's Joseph. And what does Joseph start doing? Joseph puts through a months-long, sadistic torture Months. He accuses them of being spies, arrests them, then arrests one brother, forces them to go back, bring your young brother, Benjamin. And that begins tormenting Jacob, Joseph's own father. They finally convince Jacob to send Joseph down to Egypt, to send Benjamin down to Egypt, I'm sorry. And what does Joseph do? Joseph frames Benjamin and says, okay, I'm stealing Benjamin for life. He's becoming my slave. He creates this whole narrative, Joseph. He literally starts playing with his brothers in their state of desperation. So what's Joseph doing? And then finally, after months and months and months of tormenting his brothers, he finally comes in and says, okay, it's been me all along. I am Joseph. Ta-da, right? So what's Joseph doing? Why is Joseph doing that to his brothers? That's the question. Again, what would you say would be the simple answer to that question? What would you say? You got to unmute yourself.
Like payback.
Payback. Listen, I was the little boy 22 years earlier. Now, tables have turned. You need me now. I'll give you a little piece of the pie as well, right? We're not coming fair and square until you get a little bit of a taste of that medicine. The only problem is that if you look in the Torah at the very words of Joseph, at his attitude towards his situation, you don't see that type of anger or resentment towards his brothers. What are the very first words that Joseph tells his brothers? Take a look. It's on page 106. It's line 12 from the verses. Let's just read what Joseph tells his brothers. Joseph announces to his brothers, I am Joseph. The brothers are shocked. The brothers can't even utter a word. And he tells them, and Joseph said to his brothers, now do not be distressed, and it shall not upset you that you sold me here. For as a source of livelihood, God has sent me before you. It is not you who sent me here, but God. Joseph's coming with a tremendous, courageous statement, a courageous statement of faith, and saying, brothers, this is really all God's planning. Now God has put me in a position that I could save you, I could save the whole family, I can take care of you. So he comforts the brothers. He reassures the brothers, don't worry, I have no resentment, I have no ill will, I accepted my situation. I'm not mad at you. So just think about it. If Joseph doesn't hold a grudge towards his brothers, then what's he been doing for the past few months? Why in the world didn't he just tell them right away, hey guys, I'm Joseph, and guess what? I'm not mad at you. Let me help you out. I'll give you food. Instead, he drives them nuts. He drives his own father nuts. He puts the whole family through a crisis. Why? Why would you do that if you're not upset at the situation? These are two very basic questions on the story, but they're big questions. And what they basically come and tell you is, there's no way to make heads and tails of this story if you don't understand what's really happening. If you look at the story at face value, if you watch the Broadway show, I never did, but I can imagine, right? If you watch the Broadway show on the story, it's a nice drama, but you have no clue what's happening. So let's try to figure out what's happening in this story. What is really going on? Now, the only way to really understand what's going on is to start getting some context. And in general, this is part of the discovery into the deeper elements, if you want to call it the Kabbalah, or just in general, to get down to the bottom of what's really happening in a story. There's always going to be some analysis. We always ask questions. We always start putting puzzle pieces together. And in this story, what we're going to start seeing is a very interesting puzzle. The mystery really thickens once you start seeing some more context. So let's begin. Right now we have Joseph and his brothers. We have a struggle. We have a family politics happening in the family. We have a family problem. There's no question. There's domestic trouble at home. If you want to understand what's happening, let's go a generation up. The way to understand what's happening is you need to go back to the parents. This struggle did not begin with Joseph and his brothers. It started before they were born. You have to go back to the parents. This feels a little bit like therapy, no? Go and blame the parents. It's all the parents' fault. But yeah, in this story, it's all the parents' fault. We got to go back to the story of when Jacob was getting married. And we're going to go back even earlier in Genesis. The story continues. And it's going to be in your books on page 112 if you want to follow along. We're going to have another video reading us some more text, giving us some more background to the story. And the story that we're about to read continues from last week. Jacob steals the blessings. Esau finds out. Esau, of course, understandably, is mad. He wants blood. He's after blood. And Jacob runs off. Jacob flees for his life. Jacob's mom, Rebecca, says, you know what, Jacob? Once you're leaving home, why don't you go find a nice girl to marry? Right? Not a bad idea. And that's what happens. So here goes the story. Oops.
Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. The eyes of Leah were tender, and Rachel was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. Laban said, better I give her to you than I give her to another man. Stay with me. Jacob worked for Rachel 7 years, and they were in his eyes as a few days in his love for her. And Jacob said to Laban, bring here my wife, as my days are fulfilled, and I will come to her. Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. It was in the evening, and he took his daughter Leah and brought her in to him, and he came to her. It was in the morning, and behold, she is Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Have I not served with you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me? And Laban said, it is not so done in our place to give the younger before the firstborn.
Laban, however, agrees to allow Jacob to marry Rachel as well, in exchange for another 7 years of labor.
He came also to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked with him yet another 7 years.
And that is how Jacob ended up marrying both Leah and Rachel. Leah proceeded to have 4 children, one right after the other, Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah, while Rachel remained childless. Determined to participate in the creation of the people of Israel, Rachel asked Jacob to marry her maidservant Bilhah and have children with her. That union produced Dan and Naphtali. Not to be outdone, Leah had Jacob marry her maidservant, Zilpah, which produced 2 more children, Gad and Asher. Then Leah had another 3 children of her own, 2 sons and a daughter, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Finally, Rachel's prayers were answered, and she conceived a child. Joseph was born. 8 years later, Rachel had a second son, but she tragically died in childbirth. The boy was named Benjamin.
All right. So now we got some more background here to the family. And do you feel that now we have some more clarity as to why there was jealousy between the brothers and Joseph? What do you say? Go ahead and unmute yourself. What does this tell you now? Anybody want to share? What do you say, Yulia?
He was in love
Oh,
with
go ahead,
Rachel.
Bonnie.
He was in love with Rachel, and she could finally give him a son or a child, and he became a favorite. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. With that
right, which means it's very simple. Think about the story. Jacob's real love is who? Is Rachel. He was never attracted. He never wanted Leah. He was duped into marrying Leah. Okay, so you're married, right? Too bad. Accept it. But who's, deep down, where's his love really for? Who's his love really for? Who's he really feel is his real wife? Rachel. And therefore, when he finally has a child number 11, son number 11 with Rachel, even though he's number 11 in Jacob's eyes, this is my real firstborn. This is the son I was always this is who I really always wanted to have. All the other children, okay, they're part of the family as well, but this is who I really always wanted. So Joseph becomes the apple of his brother's eye. And this is also why Jacob is so protective over the youngest son, Benjamin. Because after Joseph is gone and Rachel dies in childbirth, the only human who's left in the world who, again, is connected with Rachel, who's the real essential wife of Jacob, the only one is Benjamin, which is why Jacob becomes a protective parent. Says the brothers could go to Egypt, not you. And here we also understand the brothers' resentment. The brothers look at what's happening and they say, this is not right. Our mom Leah is also your wife, and we're also your children, and we're older. And Leah, most of your children come from Leah. So why are you marginalizing us? Why are you making us into chopped liver? We matter also. We count also. And that's where you have all this buildup of resentment and animosity. Now we understand a lot of what's happening over here. So the story of Rachel and Leah and Jacob getting duped into marrying Leah planted the seeds for the eventual drama of Joseph and his brothers. Okay, but the mystics are not happy with that explanation, which means from a historical perspective, it holds water. It's a good story, right? Makes sense. But the mystics say, 1 second. First of all, could we really settle with the fact that all this trouble began simply because Jacob was more attracted to one sister more than the other? Like, was physical attraction really all that it was? Well, the Torah says that. Rachel was beautiful, Leah was not. So Jacob shows up and says, and then can't even tolerate Leah and her family as a wife and their children, to the point he starts marginalizing his own children, which he has through Leah. Is that really what's happening here in the story? And from a mystical perspective, they say there's got to be more. There's got to be something deeper. We have to keep on digging. And there's a fascinating idea. There's something fascinating that happens in the exploration of the story, which is if you keep on digging, if you keep on analyzing, there is a real twist in this whole story. And you have this twist only by a certain sense of analysis. And I want to show you. So follow along with me. Right now we said Joseph and his brothers. Why did that happen? Because of the story with Rachel and Leah. But if you look at the Jewish texts, you'll see that the pattern goes up even one more generation to an earlier event. Do you want to know why the story of Rachel and Leah happened? Because of the struggle between Jacob and his brother Esau. What's the connection? So let me first show you some texts over here. Let's read text 9 on page 114. And this is a medrash. The medrash gives us a fascinating record of the conversation that Jacob had with his new wife Leah the morning after the wedding, when he woke up and sees, it's the wrong wife, right? It's the wrong woman. So this is what happens. Text 9, page 114. All that night, Jacob was calling to her Rachel, and she responded in kind. Then in the morning, she was Leah. Said Jacob to her, Deceiveress, the daughter of deceiver, was I not calling you Rachel, and you were answering me? Said she to him, Every teacher has his pupils. When your father was calling you Esau, did you not answer him in the same way? So this is Leah definitely gets the last word in this conversation, right? Wow. She comes out on top in this argument, right? Don't mess with Leah, you see over here. She's got a good comeback. But the mystics point to this text, a text from the Torah, and say, what's going on over here? Jacob is asking Leah, why was I just deceived? Why'd you do this to me? And it seems that Leah is saying, it's your fault. You deceived Esau. She seems to be blaming the drama that's happening right now on the previous story. But what's Esau got to do with this? What does Jacob's brother Esau, the troublemaker, have to do with this whole story? And we don't have time to get into it, but there's a bunch of clues, multiple texts. We're going to read another one soon, which connect the whole story of Rachel and Leah, and how Leah and Laban deceived Jacob into marrying Leah. They pin it on the story of Jacob and Esau, which is a very mysterious thing, because what does that have to do with the story? Why, just because Jacob deceived Esau, does he now have to also be deceived and marry the woman who he doesn't want to marry? What's the connection? So I want to share here my screen here with you, just like that you see this kind of thread and the plot over here. What we have over here is a thread of multi-generational struggles. It begins with the brother selling Joseph. And what did we say? Oh, if you want to know why the brother sold Joseph, it's because Laban tricked Jacob into marrying Leah. And then we say, well, if you want to know why Jacob was tricked into marrying Leah, that's because Jacob stole the blessings from Esau. What's the connection? How does this all come together? But what the mystics are doing over here is saying, you can't look at the story of Joseph and his brothers as an isolated incident. There's something much larger going on here. There's an undercurrent to this entire struggle, multi-struggles, all happening in Jacob's life. It's all one thing. So what is it? One more text before we find clarity. And this text is a major, the lights go off when you read this text. This is a text from the Talmud. The Talmud looks to the verse that we saw earlier in the video. And when the Torah introduces Rachel and Leah, the sisters, the Torah says the eyes of Leah were tender, and Rachel was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance. Rachel's beautiful, Leah is tender, her eyes are swollen, she doesn't look good. And the Talmud says, why was she tender? Why were her eyes so swollen? What was bothering her? So the Talmud explains, page 117, text 12. Follow along with me. Leah heard people talking. Rebekah has 2 sons, and Laban has 2 daughters. The elder will marry the elder, and the younger will marry the younger. She would sit at the crossroads and inquire, how does the elder son conduct himself? He is a wicked man, a highway robber. How does the younger son conduct himself? A wholesome man, dwelling in tents. So she wept until her eyelashes fell out. She heard that her destiny is to marry the older brother, her cousin, right? Her aunt's son. Because Laban and Rebekah were siblings. I don't know if you knew that. I don't know if I said that. Okay, that's another detail. We won't get into that now. But she heard that she's, that's what they say. Her prospect in marriage is Esau. So she went to find out who's Esau. And what does she hear? He's trouble. Who wants to get married to Esau? So she cries. And that's why she didn't look good. So the mystics, again, look at this text. And they say the Talmud's not just telling us something random. There's no even word in the Talmud, which is just there just for, historical record. Why not? The Talmud is saying something meaningful over here. The Talmud is not just reporting what, some yentas were saying at that time. Yeah, maybe Leah will marry Esau. If the Talmud is telling us this, that means that Leah was the soulmate of Esau, and Rachel was the soulmate of Jacob. This wasn't just what people were saying. This was the truth. This was destiny. Leah's husband was meant to be Esau. So we're starting to see over here some big puzzle pieces come into play. But what is all these, all these strings? How are they attached? What's going on over here? So let me show you over here. What we basically have here is a thread of 3 different struggles. And we see that they're all connected. Jacob versus Esau, that's one level of struggles. That's what we learned about last week. Jacob and Esau constantly fighting with each other. And then we say there's another one, Rachel and Leah. There's also, again, there's a certain struggle. There's a certain tension between them. And again, there's deception. On every layer, there's struggle and deception. Jacob deceives Esau. Leah deceives Jacob in the struggle between Rachel and Leah. And then we say there's a third layer of struggle between Joseph and his brothers. And we say, really, it's all the same thing. And you see, I put a line down here through the center. Jacob, Rachel, Joseph, that's one side of the struggle. Esau, Leah, Judah, who represents the brothers. Judah in general was the spokesperson of the brothers. So let's make it Joseph versus Judah. Joseph, Judah, another layer. And what does all this come together? What's the meaning behind all this? Do I have all of you, are all of you following along with me? You kind of get this whole weave, this whole web that we're building over here? It's not just Joseph and his brothers. It's not just Rachel and Leah. There's a large event happening over here. The only way to understand the story is if we understand the mysticism. And it's not just the mysticism, it's what's really happening here in the story. There's something very deep happening here in the story. There's something very deep happening in Jacob's life. And we see whatever this is happening and playing out throughout his entire life, from his youth, up until the end of his life. There's a certain struggle within Jacob's own life. And it's all one thing. And if we can understand what that struggle is, what's really the story behind this entire drama, the whole story will become very meaningful, and the story will even become personal. So let's jump in. What's the secret? What's the essence of the story? Before I jump in, I want to take, if any of you have any questions. Do any of you have any questions before we move ahead? What do you say? We're doing good so far?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's digress for a moment, and I want to teach you a concept. As we always do, right? We introduce a concept, and then we'll apply the concept to the story. Oh, Beth, do you have a question? No? Okay. I wasn't sure if you're talking to me or somebody else. That's okay. Okay. Every single soul, when a soul is born, every single soul is given a mission by God. The path of each soul is set by God. And what our soul needs to accomplish and what our soul needs to achieve, the mission is unique within every single individual. But generally speaking, you can split all the different soul missions into 2 general categories. One category is called, and I'll put it up here on the screen, the mission of a tzaddik, the life path of a tzaddik. I'll explain that term in a moment. And the other one is called the life path, the mission of a Baal Teshuvah. Now, it's possible you've heard of these terms before. Generally speaking, tzaddik means a righteous person, somebody who's good, somebody who does good, is good, only did good. That's a tzaddik. A Baal Teshuvah is a term used for, I guess, usually used as a penitent, somebody who sinned and now becomes, returns to a good path. Well, okay, those terms are used that in a very, very, if you want to say, on a certain very elementary level. Tzaddik is a term for a good person, Baal Teshuvah for somebody who maybe was not so good, then becomes better. But Jewish mysticism, Chassidus teaches these terms are much deeper than that. A tzaddik is not just describing how a person behaves. A tzaddik is a life mission, is a type of style of life. It's a mission given by God to certain souls that they will lead a life within the framework of a tzaddik lifestyle. And a Baal Teshuvah is a lifestyle that a person is born with. It's a type of soul, it's a type of mission. A tzaddik mission and the tzaddik life's path is a path of life which is pretty pristine. It's a life of purity. It's a life of goodness. These are souls that were born with the gift that life is somewhat very smooth sailing. They are born holy. They are born spiritual. They are born with tremendous potential. And their life goal is to develop that holiness, that goodness, that inner spirituality. The lifestyle of a tzaddik is very internal. I'm good. I'm holy. I'm going to remain in my cocoon, in my closed environment of warmth and goodness, and I'm going to grow. It's very self-improvement based. And a tzaddik is not somebody who's forced to, get down and dirty with the challenges of life. Tzaddik remains very, you could even call it aloof to the world, aloof to life. These are the people who live very smooth lives, very spiritual lives. And, that's a certain lifestyle. And there's something called the service of God, the service of a tzaddik. There's a certain mission that, righteous people have, and they live life within that framework, within that lifestyle. So it's a very relaxing life. It's also a very personal life. I just deal with myself. We don't have this today, but there's something called in Judaism a hidden mystic or a hidden tzaddik, a righteous person who's very personal. These were saints, very righteous people, and nobody even ever knew that they were righteous. They could be your local shoemaker. They could be your local cobbler. So there's one who became pretty famous within Jewish history. He lived about 300 years ago, and nobody ever even gave him attention. He was a simple, poor man. He was a peddler. He would just travel amongst, throughout these little villages in Russia. And everybody found out he was a mystic because one day there was a robbery in a home, and only a young girl was home. And this mystic walked in and created a miracle. He literally made the robbers and the thieves freeze until the police came. And his cover was blown. Everybody knew that he was some type of mystic who was, undercover. So that's like a tzaddik, so what was the tzaddik doing the whole day? He would live a life very personal. Nobody had to know about him. He would develop his own inner spirituality, his own inner holiness. It's a lifestyle that, we don't really relate to. It's a certain type of person. And these are the people who, even when they're forced to enter the world, they always remain disconnected from the world. They always are kind of smooth sailors. They're like a level above having to deal with the challenges of life. That's the lifestyle of a tzaddik. The lifestyle and the mission of a Baal Teshuvah is somebody that God creates their life, gives their soul the mission, where they're going to have to engage with the world. It's a life that they're forced into, whether you like it or not. They have to deal with the challenges of life. They have to deal with the setbacks of life, and they struggle because of that. These are people who, don't get to live the luxury of just developing the goodness and the spirituality of the soul. These are people who always get pulled down and are forced to deal with the struggles of life, with the challenges of life, with the temptations of life. And their mission is to serve God specifically within that context. And these people are called the Baal Teshuvah because Baal Teshuvah means, literally, it doesn't mean a penitent. The words Baal Teshuvah mean the master of return. These are people who take the materialism and the coarseness of physical life and bring it to God, return it to God. And that's really our life. We could all see that in our life. We are people who have to struggle. And it's a lifestyle where you have to kind of serve God specifically from within the struggle. You come to God and you bring The world, which is so anti-God, you bring all those resources with you in your service to God. These are two lifestyles. So let's, I'll continue putting this up here on the screen. The tzaddik is somebody who pursues inner perfection. Very personal. The Baal Teshuvah, somebody who is forced to engage with the world. I'll put it to you another way. The tzaddik is all about self-improvement. The world could go take a hike. I don't care what's happening in the world. My business is what's happening with me. A Baal Teshuvah is the mission of perfecting the world. You're forced to meet the world. You got to leave the home. You got to go enter the cold, the dark. You got to go fight in the trenches. It's a different type of service, different type of mission that God gives to souls. Okay, what does this have to do with our story? Jacob and Esau were born with two different life missions, two different types of souls. Jacob was born with the soul and the mission of a tzaddik. Esau was born with the soul and the life mission of a Baal Teshuvah. And you see this in the first moments of life. Jacob, how does the Torah describe him? As a wholesome man, which means a man of perfection. He was, that straight A student, just didn't have challenges, had a smooth life. And the Torah says he was a dweller of tents. He stayed home. He studied Torah. He remained, somewhat locked up, by choice. He stayed home, surrounded himself by his own warmth, and developed that warmth, developed his holiness. That was the lifestyle of Jacob. Then you got Esau. How does the Torah describe Esau? Right away, you see that he's up to a lifestyle out of the home. He's born as a fighter. He's all hairy. He excels not in the home, but outside of the home. He becomes a hunter. He becomes a man of the world. His job was to engage with the world, be the Baal Teshuvah. Don't be locked up like a tzaddik. Go out into the world, meet the world, find the resources of the world, and serve God from within that context. Now, let's continue down the line over here. So Jacob had the tzaddik mission, Esau, the Baal Teshuvah mission. But let's continue. The same thing with Rachel and Leah. Rachel was Jacob's soulmate. Leah was Esau's soulmate. How does the Torah describe Rachel? She was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance. The Torah is not just telling you her outward appearance. The Torah is also describing to you who she was, her personality, what her soul looked like. Just like Jacob, a wholesome man, that was Rachel. She was born as a tzaddik, or in the feminine form, a tzaddikis. She was born perfect, and her mission, her soulmate, was to marry Jacob and do, together, the mission of a tzaddik. Very internal, develop that spirituality as a couple. Leah, you could see in her eyes the scars of life. That's what the Torah describes to her. She was born with the soul of a struggler, the Baal Teshuvah, one who has to get out there, meet the setbacks and struggles of life. Her soulmate was always Esau. She was born with the soul of a Baal Teshuvah. And destiny was that Esau would marry Leah. Together, they would fulfill the mission of the Baal Teshuvah. Does that make sense? What ultimately ended up happening? What ended up happening is, now here's the big twist. Follow along with me. So let's look over here. The original plan was Esau would develop the material world within the mission of a Baal Teshuvah. Jacob's mission was to develop the spiritual world. Destiny for Esau was not to become evil. Destiny for Esau was to indeed be somebody who is very engaged with the world, with the material life, but he would be a holy person. He would serve God from within that context. So Esau and Jacob were meant to be brothers, side by side, fulfilling their mission in life, each having their own unique mission. Esau as the Baal Teshuvah, developing the material world, and Jacob as the Tzaddik, developing the spiritual world. But that was the original plan. What ended up happening? Esau became corrupted. Instead of Esau gaining control of the material world, the opposite happened. The material world took control over Esau, and Esau dropped his mission. And this is why Rebekah told Jacob, you now have to go and steal the blessings from Esau. You now have to go and take over the mission of Esau. Jacob's mission ultimately was he has to be the master of both worlds. He has to be the mission of a tzaddik and the mission of a Baal Teshuvah. So that was Jacob's mission. Jacob's mission became to be the master of both worlds. Let me ask you a question. Did Jacob want to steal the blessings from his brother Esau last week? Did he say, yeah, sure, that sounds like an awesome plan? Jacob didn't want to. Jacob wasn't just stealing blessings, right? Blessings aren't free. He was stealing a mission. He was stealing an identity. He was taking over Esau's life mission. And therefore, even though the mission that Jacob had to adopt was to master both worlds, Jacob's desire was always his own mission, the mission he was born with, to develop the spiritual world. So he was kind of forced into the mission of mastering both worlds. But if you want to know what Jacob felt deep in his heart, it was the need to, it was his original mission, the mission he was born with, just to be the tzaddik, to develop the spiritual world. Think about it. Which person who was born with a lifestyle of perfection wants to be forced to take on the mission of struggles, of having to meet the material world? Nobody wants that. So Jacob wasn't excited about the prospect of now having to also adopt his brother's mission. Now, let's continue with the story. Now we can understand why Jacob desired Rachel so much. Because Rachel was that soulmate who shared his original mission, who shared his original soul identity. Although he didn't want to, he had to marry Leah as well. Because Leah was the soulmate of the mission of the Baal Teshuvah. And when Jacob stole the blessings from Esau, that means he also had to get married to the woman who Esau was supposed to get married to. But here you see the exact same tension. Jacob is a little bit forced into adopting Esau's mission, right? He doesn't walk into the marriage with Leah happily. You see the struggle over there, and you see how Jacob's desire is my original mission. That's the mission that burned in his heart. That's the mission that burnt in his soul. So when he saw Rachel, he didn't see Rachel's outward appearance. He saw Rachel's soul. He saw, this is my original soulmate. This is the person who I will live with and fulfill our mission together. But let's take this one more step forward. Rachel and Leah's children adopted the soul from their mother. Joseph was born with the soul of a tzaddik. His brothers who were born from Leah were born with the soul of the Baal Teshuvah, which is very interesting. We see this again in the way the Torah describes Joseph. The Torah, very interestingly, speaks about Joseph as being beautiful. The same way they speak about his mother Rachel, that she was of beautiful appearance, beautiful form. Same thing about Joseph. Joseph was a beautiful person, both physically and also spiritually. His soul had that perfection of a tzaddik. The Torah says Joseph succeeded in everything he did. Can you imagine? Nobody lived a life of more challenge than Joseph. Tell me anybody who's living today who had a more challenging life. Bullied, sold as a slave by his brothers, ends up being seduced and thrown into a dungeon in foreign Egypt. And what happens to Joseph? He ends up becoming leader of the whole Egypt. I'm saying, is that not a success story from rags to riches? Joseph is this person that's tzaddik, just aloof, succeeds, beautiful. He doesn't have to engage with the world. Leah's children, you see the life of struggle. You see the life of temptation. You see the life of setbacks. We won't get into all the details, but if you look at the stories in the Torah, the story with Dinah, the story with Judah, you see there the lifestyle of a Baal Teshuvah, one who has to struggle. And this is also the reason why Jacob favored Joseph. Because when Jacob looked at Joseph, he saw himself in Joseph. This is my soul. This is who I really am, the soul of a tzaddik, the life mission of a tzaddik. Are we making sense? So it's a very cosmic idea going on over here. Jacob, Rachel, Joseph represent the mission of the tzaddik. Esau, Leah, and Leah's children represent the service of a Baal Teshuvah, which are two very different lifestyles. Okay, let's get back to answering the questions. And I'm going to be about 5 minutes over today. All right, 5 minutes grace time for me. All right. Why was there so much tension between the brothers? It's very simple. The brothers knew that they were the future of the Jewish people. And they knew that they will leave their mark on the Jewish people. The struggle was a struggle of what's going to be the future of the Jewish people. What's going to be the ultimate mission of the Jewish people? What's going to define the nation of Israel? Is it going to be the mission of a tzaddik, a very insular, very personal type of lifestyle? Or is it going to be a mission of a Baal Teshuvah, a religion that engages with the world, struggles with the world, and makes the world a better place? Now, the reason why it got so tense is because Jacob was showing a favoritism. Jacob was kind of showing Leah's children, you guys have a mission, but he seemed to imply, or the way the brothers took Jacob's favoritism of Joseph was, the future is not with you. The future of Judaism is not with you. The future of Judaism is Joseph. And if you think about it, the previous two forefathers, Abraham had more sons than Isaac, but he chose one son to be the future of Judaism. Only Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. He only chose one to be the future of Judaism. So the brothers look at Joseph and they see very clearly Jacob saying, the future of Judaism is not with you guys, it's with Joseph. So it became a certain spiritual battle of what is going to be the future of Judaism. Is it going to be the Baal Tshuva, let's go out there and affect the world? Or is it going to be the tzaddik, stay indoors, develop your own spirituality? And because each one only possessed one mission, there was a certain intolerance. They couldn't even identify, they couldn't even see the other's mission as being legitimate, as being something important. So Joseph didn't get along with his brothers, and the brothers didn't get along with Joseph. It's a very interesting concept. They lived with their own mission. That mission burned in their hearts, and that was kind of what the struggle was. Ultimately, the brothers were wrong. Joseph was not looking to overthrow them, and Jacob wasn't looking to overthrow them. The answer is both are important. Which one is primary? Which mission in Judaism is primary? Working on yourself or working with the world? The answer is both. The answer is both. But at the time when the brothers bullied up and sold Joseph as a slave, the brothers didn't accept that. The brothers said, it's either me or you, Joseph. What Joseph was waiting to see was an acceptance from the brothers of both missions. Hold that thought. All right? Hold that thought. We'll get back to Joseph in a moment. What we see over here is a certain cosmic debate, a certain cosmic struggle. Which service is more important? Which mission is more important? Self-perfection or to perfect the world? And what I want to point out to you, the same way this struggle began before Joseph and his brothers were even born, the struggle continued throughout all of Jewish history. There was a struggle between two factions of the Jewish people. The struggle of Joseph and his brothers runs a seam through the entirety of Jewish history. You see this duality throughout all of history. Let me just show you over here. Joseph, the kingdom of Israel, the first generations of the kingdom of the Jewish people was in the children, the progeny of Joseph. Afterwards, it switched over to Judah with the kingdom of David. When it switched over, there was a struggle. Saul didn't want David to take over the kingdom. You see there? The same struggle back and forth. Another type of duality we see. There were two types of divine dwellings. There was a tabernacle, there was a holy temple. The tabernacle, when it came to Israel, resided, let me just show this to you over here. The tabernacle, the Mishkan, it was situated in the town of Shiloh, which is in Joseph's territory. The holy temple was built in Jerusalem on Judah's territory. You see the duality again. And the sages tell us that when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, there's actually going to be two Mashiachs. First is going to be the Mashiach, the son of Joseph, and he's going to introduce Mashiach ben Judah, Mashiach who comes from Judah. And I can give you so many more examples where you see this dual mission, this dual identity within the Jewish people. And think about it, we see it till today. There's even a debate happening till today. It's been going on for years, but it's still till today. There's no real answer to the question yet. What should be the Jewish mission? This is a big debate within Orthodoxy, within the religious world. Should Judaism be a religion, a very insular religion? We'll live in our own communities, we'll develop our own spirituality, let the world go to hell, right? The world could become a mess. Who cares? We'll have our own communities. We'll lead our own communities. We won't hear what the world has to say. That's one model within Orthodoxy. That's the model of Joseph. Then there's another model within Orthodoxy. What do they say? No, we got to go and we got to bring Judaism to the world. We got to struggle with the world. We have to meet the world where it's at and bring the world. Make the world a better place. Make the world a holier place. That's the mission of the Baal Tshuva. That's Judah. That's the brothers. That's Leah's children. So at every juncture of Jewish history, you see this struggle, a holy struggle, between two identities, between two missions. Jacob himself struggled with these two identities. His children struggled with these two identities. And you could even say within every single individual Jew, there's a certain struggle between these two identities. What is really my calling in life? Take care of myself, perfect myself, or be there for others, have an impact outside of myself? Some of us lean one way, some of us lean the other way, but there's a struggle. I want to do this more, but you got to also do this. And you really see this coming home, becoming very personal. We'll conclude with this piece of Talmud over here. Turn to page 124. A very simple reading of Talmud, but all of a sudden, because of this class, this Talmud has you're going to have a whole new appreciation for this Talmud. Text 16, page 124. It was already the case that Rabbi Tarfon and the sages were assembled in the loft of the Nitza house in Lud, when the query came before them, which is greater, Learning is learning or action. Which is greater? Said Rabbi Tarfon, action is greater. Said Rabbi Akiva, learning is greater. Friends, do you see the struggle right here? Learning, self-improvement, or action? Do something outside of yourself. Fix the world, help the world, make an impact in the world. Conclude it all. Learning is greater because learning brings to action. Does that help us much? Is the Talmud answering the question or just making things more complicated? The Talmud is kind of cementing the nature of the struggle. They're both important. And good luck trying to figure out which one's more important. On the one hand, learning is greater. But really, learning is only greater because it leads to action, which seems to imply that action is greater. But learning is greater. There you go. Let's conclude the story. The brothers come down to Egypt 22 years after they sell Joseph in a certain intolerance. They don't accept Joseph's identity. They don't accept Joseph's mission in life. Joseph knows that the only answer to this family politics, the only answer to this family feud, is an acceptance from both sides that both are important. The brothers totally, dropped Joseph. They said, I'm sorry, Joseph, you have no place with the Jewish people. Our mission is the only one. Joseph was waiting to see from the brothers that they had a certain acceptance, that they were ready to accept both missions. So what did Joseph do? Joseph wasn't tormenting them. Joseph was creating a situation where the brothers will be in the exact same type of situation as they were 22 years earlier. An opportunity to get rid of Rachel's children. So what did Joseph do? He made sure to get Benjamin away from his father, out of that security, bring him to Egypt, and present to the brothers the opportunity to get rid of the last remaining son of Rachel. It was a test for the brothers. Did the brothers still harbor that same intolerance as they did 22 years earlier to Joseph and that sole identity? Or did now the brothers realize and understand that both need to live side by side? And the moment Joseph saw that the brothers passed the test, the brothers had a golden opportunity. If the brothers wanted to get rid of the children of Rachel, before 22 years earlier, they actually had to go and kill somebody. Today, they just had to be passive. What could we do? The leader of Egypt stole Benjamin from us. But the brothers stood up for Benjamin and said, I'm sorry, he's with us. You want war? You got war. That's what Judah did. The moment Joseph saw that, Joseph said, okay, I am Joseph. This was the moment we were waiting for reconciliation, for an acceptance of both sides. And that became the story of the Jewish people. There are two missions within the Jewish people. There's action, there's learning, there's that tzaddik, very personal work. There's the Baal Tshuva, fix the world. And as the Talmud said, we see in the Talmud, there's a debate. Action, learning, you need both. That's where the story leads us to. The brothers accept Benjamin. The brothers accept Joseph. And for all of Jewish history, they live side by side, two models. And the story for us is, the lesson for us is that, as I said earlier, the debate still rages on within the Jewish community, and the debate rages on within each of us personally. Some say, studying Torah, this, that, religious observance, that's not my cup of tea. What's important in Jewish life? Got to go fix the world. Tikkun olam, you got to, community activism, call it whatever you want. Others say, no, religiosity, spirituality, that's what's most important in Judaism. And the answer is you need both. The Talmud says learning is greater, but you want to know why it's great? Not because inherently learning is greater, because that's how you fix the world. So it's both. What the Talmud is saying is, what this whole story tells us is, you can't fix the world. There's no action if you don't learn. If you're going to try to fix the world, but you don't have clarity, you don't have direction, you don't have focus, best case scenario, you're like a chicken without a head. You know what chickens look like without a head? They run around in circles. You're not doing anything. Worst case scenario, you'll be like Esau, corrupted by the world. Instead of you changing the world may compromise you. So you need both. You can't change the world without studying, which is why, according to Jewish tradition, the first thing you should do in the morning is study something. Before you enter the world, develop yourself first. First learn, first tzaddik, first that model of life. Even just for 5 minutes, study something, pray something, a little bit of spirituality for yourself before you face the world. But then, don't get stuck in the prayer. Don't get stuck studying. Face the world. Fight with the world. We see this dichotomy. Both have to be there. And as well, if you only study, the Talmud says, I'm sorry, studying is only great because you do something with it. Having money in a bank account is only worth something if you actually use it for something. So what's all your learning and spiritual growth worth if you don't do anything with it? So this is what the story is really all about. It's between two souls, two life missions, two identities which are about to be the essence, to form the essence of the Jewish people. But there's a struggle. And that's what the whole story is all about. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I went 15 minutes over. Well, thank you all for being such a captive audience, for staying here with us. I guess an hour is just a little bit too short for these secrets. Okay, next week.
Can I ask you a
yes,
question?
Of course, go ahead.
It's not an important question. I'm just curious.
Every
What is the
question is
significance of the 22 years? Why 22? Do you know?
Yes. On a literal level, on the most simple level, first of all, I'll tell you, nothing in Judaism is trivial. So if the Torah tells us 22 years, there's something about 22 years. There's definitely a significance. And in general, I think I said this in earlier classes, one of the biggest goals of this class is not to answer questions. The real truth is I could have told you simple, easy, quick answers for all the questions in the story within 10 minutes. The problem is that these questions don't give you the master key to understanding the story. When you understand the essence of the story, I'm not answering questions. Every detail falls into place the moment you have the secret of the Bible. Once you have the true essence of the story, every question gets answered, and every detail fits right in. So I can assure you, Beth, that the 22-year number fits in with the idea of this class. Now, how it does, I don't know, but I got to look it up. Now, on a simple level, the number 22 is because it was somewhat of a payback that Jacob left his father and wasn't in touch with his father for 22 years because Jacob had to run away from his home after he stole the blessings, and that was for 22 years. So the Talmud says 22 years Jacob wasn't able to fulfill the commandment to honor your father and mother, and therefore for 22 years he was on the receiving end of that lack of respect, that lack of connection from a son to a father. So that's a nice connection, but it doesn't explain on a deeper level the significance of the 22 years, but it's definitely connected. Numbers have a big part of everything in Torah as well. In general, every detail, if the Torah tells us a detail, it's not there for storytelling. Especially when it comes to the forefathers. There's a famous rule in Judaism. The stories of our forefathers become the signs for their children. That's the term. It becomes like a sign, it becomes a symbol. Every detail of stories of our forefathers is really the story of the Jewish people, as we saw here in today's class. So there's even certain details like this. Abraham's wife, think about it this way. Abraham's wife came to him. Sorry, Abraham went to go meet his wife. Isaac, the wife came to him. Jacob again goes to get his wife. Even in that it's a minor detail. It's part of the storytelling. Happens to be that Isaac didn't go fetch his wife traveled to him. It's all part of the identity, the soul mission of each of these forefathers. How many years did they live? And numbers have a very big part of it. So I have no doubt that the 22 years is a very big part of it.
Okay. Well, it was a great class. Thank you. Great class.
Okay, you're very welcome. And okay, next week, moving pretty far along in the Torah, we're going to talk about the story of the broken tablets, the golden calf, the great sin that the Jews did. Another rocky story that needs a lot of. We got to get the secrets for that story. So that's coming up next week. Whew, all right. Any more
you.
questions?
Thank you.
All right.
Levy.
Thank
You're all
you.
very welcome.
Levy.
Okay, God bless you all. Have a good Shabbos.
Hello.
Thank you.
Levy.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
I just
Yes,
wanted
go
to
ahead, Al.
say,